much I appreciate him, and Jan was down, and I was leaving. Thank you very much for that. This morning, our message will be coming from Proverbs chapter 1. Proverbs chapter 1, words to the wise. Today I began a project that I've never undertaken in ministry. I'm attempting to preach through the book of Proverbs. I'm going to tell you, I'm not going to hit everything. There's no way I can. There's no way I can, but I'm going to preach a series of messages through November from the book of Proverbs. I preached my very first sermon, first real sermon, February of 1978, a long time ago, but I can still remember it. There's a little country church down in Hertford, North Carolina. If you don't know where it is, don't worry, but if you're a baseball fan, it was the home of Catfish Hunter, if you remember Catfish Hunter. And that was where it was. But it was a little country church in Hertford, North Carolina, and I was a freshman at that, what was known then as Roanoke Bible College. It's now Mid-Atlantic Christian University. They changed the name a few years ago. But at that time, the school had a class that was required of everybody there in the second semester. Basically, they threw the students to the dogs. And there's groups of 4 that go out to different churches. And in my group of 4, sadly, 2 have already passed away. So it makes me think a lot. But I remember that first day I preached for about 15 minutes. Don't worry, I'm going to preach longer than that today. But 15 minutes. But the guy that went with me that night, I'll never forget that. He had preached the night service, and he preached for 4 minutes. And folks, he was, that's about how he talked. And then as soon as he finished, he got back in the seat, you could hear him say, whoo. And we all laughed about that. That was memorable. That summer, I had a little bit of an internship at my home church in Lawrenceburg. That fall, I went back to North Carolina, had my first ministry, a youth ministry in New Bern, North Carolina. And since then, I've served several different churches, including East Union. And I filled in at other churches, both just on one Sunday when the preacher was gone or something, or in the interim over time. I've served churches in North Carolina, Kentucky, and Indiana. And I preached at churches in 4 other states. I have a bachelor's degree in Bible and master's in theology. And I'm not giving you that little resume to brag. I was just thinking, though, this week as I was preparing this message, some of the ironies of my ministries. Over the years, I've preached a lot of sermons. And I've had some series of sermons that I thought were very good. And I've had some that I wish I would have forgotten. Because that's just how it is. I preached a lot of different sermons, but never have I preached through Proverbs. I preached some sermons in Proverbs, but never through it as a series. And you've probably picked up that my favorite way of preaching is to take one passage of Scripture and really break it down as to what the original writer said and try to bring that to what does that mean to us today. And that passage can be anywhere from 1 or 2 verses to 25 or 30. Usually I take 5 or 10. Y'all, I'm sure you've noticed that. That's just a style I've developed, and that's how I'm most comfortable. So today I'm beginning a series of messages through Proverbs. And folks, it's kind of scary to me because I'm out of my comfort zone when I'm preaching from Proverbs. It's different. Because the book of Proverbs is not like any other book in the Bible. You see, while most of the historical, or the Bible is a historical narrative of prophets or letters, in some paragraph style, nearly 2/3 of the 915 verses in the book of Proverbs are just short sayings of wisdom. They're not lengthy, contained material. That's why they're called Proverbs. It's what a proverb is. It's a short saying. And over the time, like I said, I've preached some sermons from Proverbs, but not many. Back when we were told you couldn't do anything in March I was about to go nuts. And Stephanie had been on me for, well, so we moved into our house in 2014, probably since 2015. Clean up your office. And I had most of my old sermons in a file cabinet. And so I took a couple of days and went through them all and scanned them and put them in a neat little file in my computer. So now everything I've saved over 40 years is in that little file. Those sermons are shredded, they're gone. I had to go back this week to look. You know how many sermons I had from Proverbs in there? I've been preaching, like I said, off and on 40 years. It was less than 5. Less than 5. And that was 5 that I had kept. There might have been more, but I just discarded or whatever. I don't know. But I had found 5. And that's not saying good or bad. I'm just saying that that's just something I've done a lot of. But it's something I wish I could change because there's so much about Proverbs that's so relevant to today. I don't know if you ever heard of this fellow, but Thomas Campbell was one of the great preachers in the late 1700s, the early 1800s. He's the father of Alexander Campbell, who you may have heard of. And Thomas Campbell is said to have believed that Proverbs had so much material for his children, and it would help any person in life that he had his children memorize the entire book. Wow! Now, let's think about though, in the 1700s, 1800s, a little bit different time than nowadays. But still, that's how much he thought about it. Now, if you think about the Proverbs, though, some of them are kind of funny. One of them I think is funny is in Proverbs 26:17, which says, like one who grabs a stray dog by the ears is someone who rushes into a quarrel not their own. Now, folks, have you ever tried to grab a stray dog by its ears? I haven't. I've tried to grab non-stray dogs. What would that be called? I don't know. Dogs that I know about, and folks, they don't like that. Most of them do not like that at all. I have a sneaking suspicion that if you would grab a stray dog's ears, things wouldn't turn out well. And what's this proverb saying? It's saying, don't jump into an argument that's not your own. That's wisdom, folks. And wisdom is timeless. And I want you to remember, folks, that the wise man seeks to do God's will. Central thought of today's message. The wise man seeks to do God's will. So let's look at Proverbs 1. We're going to go a little bit through it. We're not going to read every verse, but just a few verses in Proverbs 1. The first thing I want to remind you of is that the fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge. When I was in high school, long time ago, if you had the grades, you wanted to go to college. Now then, you would get the knowledge that you would supposedly have to succeed. So I got out of college. I enrolled at the University of Kentucky for a year. And folks, when I went over to the University of Kentucky, I knew what I was going to be doing 44 years later. I was going to be managing a farm and driving around in a big dually pickup truck. And some of you are laughing. Folks, I am too, because plans change, do they not? Plans can change. My question is, how do we become wise? That's the question that's often asked. Today we're starting this trip through Proverbs. Now, as I said, a proverb is just a wise saying. In verse 1, we're told the Proverbs of Solomon, son of David, king of Israel. They're from Solomon. 1 Kings chapter 4, verse 23 says that Solomon had uttered about 3,000 of these little proverbs. And Solomon is known as the man that's the wisest man. And you remember in 1 Kings chapter 3, there were two women that were fighting over a child. You remember that story? And what did Solomon do? He brought the women before and he said, well, bring the baby and bring a man with a sword, and I will split the baby in half, and each woman can have half the child. Why did he do that? It's because he knew that the mother would come to the aid of the child and say no. That's how he settled that dispute. You see, the purpose of the book of Proverbs is to gain wisdom and understanding. Verse 2, for gaining wisdom and instruction and understanding words of insight. Then in verse 3 he says, you're receiving instruction in prudent behavior, doing what is right and just and fair. But then you go on to verse 7. Look at what verse 7 says. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge, but fools despise wisdom and instruction. Folks, we owe everything we have to God. Everything we have. You know, as we were driving up here this morning, and such a beautiful, beautiful morning. I didn't even mention this to Stephanie, you know, because a lot of times I'm doing my last minute thoughts and such. It's coming up here. But, you know, you drive from Frankfurt, where we get on the interstate, to Mount Sterling. I don't like to drive interstate very much, but that's a nice, pretty interstate drive. You know, and you can see so many things that God has given us. Everything we have is from God. And I think that's showing that it's foolish to not fear God. Despite, you know, the people who are foolish and who don't fear God despise wisdom and instruction. Folks, we need to understand that when Solomon says the fear of the Lord, back up. Back up. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge. He's not talking, when he uses knowledge, he's using knowledge and wisdom interchangeably. But we, in our usage today, knowledge and wisdom are different. Knowledge here is not being able to spout off some math formula. Now folks, I get lost in that. Stephanie's a math specialist. That's one thing that she's smarter than me on.
One of many.
One of them. But she's the math specialist. Knowledge is not being able to spout off some math formula. It's not scoring a 36 on the ACT. That's a perfect score on your ACT. It's not making all A's at school. It's not just knowing everything. What Solomon is talking about is what we know as wisdom. And folks, intelligence does not equal wisdom. How many of us know people that we say they're educated fools? There are many. I wish our education system today was bent more on making men to be right, honest, and upright, not merely to be educated and rich. I really believe that. And the older I get, the more I understand that. That we need to focus on those things. We live in a world that almost worships knowledge and riches. Some of the stuff you read about today, and I won't go into it because I'm not going to have time. Because if you get me started, I won't stop. But some of the stuff that you read about or see on the TV news, I can only conclude that these people are educated idiots. I say a lot of heads not. Because, I'm sorry, that's rough. I don't know any other way to put it. But I think of this guy. Y'all remember Jethro? Jethro, man, he was smart. He was smart. He was going to be a double-knot spy. He was going to be a brain surgeon and everything else. And I remember one of the great episodes of the Beverly Hillbillies. Uncle Jed was bragging on him. Boy, listen to that boy. He sure can cipher. He's had 12 years of education, clean through the 6th grade. Y'all remember that? But we live in a world that people, for all practical purposes, says a fish evolved and became a man, eventually. Not fish turned right into man, but it said that's how it started. We live in a world that says this beautiful universe just happened. Folks, don't insult my intelligence for saying that. The beauty of this world required a great creator. There's no other way it happened. Today, there are people saying that men can have babies. Okay? And many in the world say there's no such thing as God. But what does Psalm say? Psalm 14:1 says, the fool says in his heart, there is no God. One thing I've found in Proverbs, as I've been studying ahead a little bit on these messages, is there's emphasis on learning from the older people. And then when we are older, we can still also learn. There's a lot of times I sit down in the daytime and I wish I was as smart today as I was when I was 25. Some of you are laughing. You know what I'm getting at here. But I learn something new every day. One thing I've learned, I keep learning, I'll keep following. Don't argue with people on Twitter and Facebook. You're not going to win. But every day I also learn that I'm not the smartest person in the world. There was a time I thought I was a whole lot smarter than I am. But it's interesting to see what happens, or what Solomon said. In Proverbs 9:9, Solomon said, instruct the wise, and they will be wiser still. Teach the righteous, and they will add to their learning. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge. Second thing I want to give you today, if sinful men entice you, don't give in. That's directly out of Proverbs 1:10. Proverbs 1:10 says, my son, if sinful men entice you, do not give in to them. He's pleading. Solomon is pleading with his son. We don't know how many children Solomon had. We don't know that. What we know from the 1 Kings 11 is he had 700 wives and 300 concubines. Now, of course, things were different then. But the only child we know the name of is Rehoboam. We don't know how many he had. But one thing is clear in verse 10, he says, my child, if sinners entice you, turn your back on them. Folks, you ever feel that way? Let me tell you something. I can guarantee this. The world is going to put pressure on us to join in. The world can paint quite a picture in a young person or even an old person in their mind. And then they can invite and tempt and entice us to fall. I don't know anybody who gets up in the morning and starts out their life and says, I just want to mess my life up. Do you know anybody that does that? I don't know anybody that does that. I don't know anybody who has a life ambition to spend it in jail. I don't know anybody that has a life ambition to mess up their life. It usually starts out with something small. And sometimes we will correct them and slap them on the wrist, don't do it again, and they do it again. But the best way to overcome this is to have a bad outside, to overcome a bad outside is to have a strong inside. When I went to the University of Kentucky, I was enrolled in the College of Agriculture. I was majoring in basketball games. But, I went there for a year and a half actually. And I can remember one class, an elective class, it was a political science class. And I can't remember exactly how many classes I took at UK. This is the only one that did this at that time. Now, this is back in the late 70s. But this professor, I remember, he ridiculed the Christian faith nearly every class. My faith was tested. I can't imagine what it is today. I just can't. But look at what Solomon says. He says these things are driven by evil. Look at Proverbs 1, 11 through 14. Proverbs 1, 11 through 14 says, and let's see, there we go. Proverbs 1, 11 through 14, if they say, come along with us, let's lie in wait for innocent blood, let's ambush some harmless soul, let's swallow them alive like the grave, the whole, like those go down to the pit. We will get all sorts of valuable things and fill our houses with plunder. Cast lots with us, and we will share the loot. Solomon says these things drive evil. In verses 12 and 13, there's that hope of gain. He talks about robbery and murder. We will gain things, all valuable things, fill our houses with plunder. We'll swallow them alive like the grave. Those who are talking about robbery and murder, talking about bad things to the people. Verse 14, cast your lots with us and you'll get rich. Then you go to Proverbs 1, 17 and 18, and there we read, it says, how useless to spread a net where every bird can see it. These men lie in wait for their own blood. They ambush only themselves. It says they're lurking for the innocent, seeking to destroy our relationship with God. As I was reading this, it so reminded me of 1 Peter chapter 5 and verse 8 in the New Testament. Peter said, be alert and of sober mind. Your enemy, the devil, prowls around like a roaring lion, looking for someone to devour. Resist him, standing firm in the faith, because you know the family of believers throughout the world is undergoing the same kind of sufferings. If evil men entice you, resist. Third thing, this goes on into verse 33. Whoever listens to God will live in safety. All through Proverbs 1, there's a lot of references to the wicked. A lot of references to the wicked. And here's a statement about all these things, about the wicked and the security of following God. In Proverbs chapter 1, verse 25, we see that Solomon says, since you disregard all my advice and do not accept my rebuke, I in turn will laugh when disaster strikes you. I will mock when calamity overtakes you. When calamity overtakes you like a storm, when disaster sweeps over you like a whirlwind, and distress and trouble overwhelm you. Then you go on to verse 26, and I don't think I put this on a slide. Verse 26 says, I in turn will laugh. I just put it in 26. I messed my notes up here. Yes, I was wrong.
You did what?
I was wrong. But I in turn will laugh when disaster strikes you. I will mock when calamity overtakes you. It almost sounds like he's saying they had it coming. They had it coming. I don't know what can be more fearful than the powerful force of nature. I personally am not terribly frightened by storms, but some get to me. Tornadoes get to me because I am old enough to remember April 3rd, 1974, and I've mentioned this before. Tornadoes came through this area, and I could see the one from our farm. I could see the one that went through Frankfurt. And we did take cover, but we didn't lose anything. But then when I lived in North Carolina in 1979, I remember going inland when a hurricane was predicted to go right over us. And I'd never experienced a hurricane, and the people down there say, you don't want to experience one either. Well, I went inland, and luckily, the hurricane turned just before it hit the Outer Banks. I remember that still. But it still made me concerned. And there's times I'm not going to go out there when the lightning is striking around. I've got metal inside my head of these things. I'm not stupid. I'm not going to do that. And when I was 5 or 6 years old, I saw lightning strike a tree about 100 yards, or maybe 50 yards in front of me. And that's always stuck with me. So I have a healthy respect, and that's what the Bible here says God's power, God's wrath is toward those. But then you reap the rewards of foolishness. And look what he says in Proverbs 1:33. Proverbs 1:33, but whoever listens to me will live in safety and be at ease without fear and harm. You see, we've had a lot of physical calamity this year with the virus. But you can have spiritual calamity too. You can have spiritual storms in your life. It could be drugs, it could be alcohol, it could be family issues, it could be many different things. Solomon's not saying that you're not going to always survive physically. But as we see in the New Testament, we have Jesus Christ. And we can get through because we know our salvation can't be taken from us. I remember in 1 John chapter 2, verse 17, what John says. The world and its desires pass away, but whoever does the will of God lives forever. So what does this mean today? That's the last thing I want to ask. We need to seek wisdom. That doesn't mean that we have to have a lot of book learning. Now, I'm not downgrading that. I'm not downgrading being intelligent. But some of the wisest people I know did not even graduate from high school because they feared God and have learned to rely on God. So put God first. Knowledge and riches are nice, but they're temporary. Folks, you can be driving a Lamborghini or a Rolls Royce and be killed in that car wreck. It can be taken from us. Believe it or not, I'm a football fan. I love to watch football. And folks, I'm a Dallas Cowboys fan. Oh. It's been one of those years. First year, I remember the first game they played, the 77. Oh, they're going to be good this year. I said, well, a lot of them are picking to go to the Super Bowl. A couple of weeks ago, Doc Prescott, the quarterback, has a very serious injury. Breaks his ankle and foot just hanging on his leg, just dangling around there. Compound fracture. It was sickening to see it. But then they'd signed the second quarterback, Andy Dalton, who I always thought was better with the Bengals and people gave him credit for it. So what happens last week? He gets hurt. And now today they're starting a rookie that nobody ever heard of. And of course, some of my friends who despise the Cowboys have been giving me a hard time all football season because of that. But things can be taken from us. We can have all things taken from us. Let's seek God in all things. Folks, we have something coming up Tuesday. Oh boy. We have an election. And if you haven't voted, please do. Because we are to be concerned about the world around us. But whoever of these two men becomes the next president, we need to remember something. Whether you vote, your man wins or loses, Jesus Christ is still on the throne. That's the ultimate thing. We need to pray for the winners to have wisdom, and we need to pray that we react with wisdom. And we need to remember that these men are human beings. They're both flawed human beings. I'm not saying to discount everything, but they're flawed human beings with weaknesses. Let me remind you that you can be enthusiastic about a candidate, but if we put all of our trust in a political party, we're going to be disappointed. And folks, I get involved in politics, but our allegiance is to God. And we should always act with wisdom. That's what you have today. Folks, this morning, we're going to close with a song. Jan Allen picked a good one. Trust and Obey.